Yes. Hello, and I know you thought you were rid of me. Today is Friday, December the 4th. And I put in that little extra uh, mini lecture, which is, you follow my cursor right here, because I didn't think I did a good enough job yesterday of talking about John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and how critical they are to this thing called Enlightenment, particularly John Locke. Your hero from this point on, he'll be referred to as your hero and mine, John Locke, because I really do believe that his thoughts going forward were central to the age of reason. I think they are also central to the foundation of this country. John Locke was a deist, another one, like Thomas Jefferson, and I'm sure that Thomas Jefferson read him through and through. And so it's no surprise that Thomas Jefferson used John Locke in uh, writing the Declaration of Independence. Too bad back then they didn't have to credit the people they utilized in writing. Yeah, because there's no way around it. Thomas Jefferson copied the thoughts of John Locke and then said, "Oh, I came up with this." Anyway, yeah, I mean, the writing of the Declaration of Independence, 1776. Actually, the founding fathers voted on resolution to separate from Great Britain on July the 2nd. And then they selected a committee of people, four people: Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, two other guys, I don't know who they were, to draft a document. And it was like Thomas Jefferson was the youngest one, and it was like either that or go out and get coffee. And so yeah, he wrote the document, the Declaration of Independence. I'm not a great fan of Thomas Jefferson. I know many other people in our department are, but I'm certainly you know just not as much of one. But he was a core figure to the Enlightenment, to the founding of this country. But for now, let's go on. I wanted to spend the goal for today is to take you through a few more of the thinkers of the Enlightenment who dealt with political reform. Yeah, you remember that the whole idea of the Enlightenment, the whole framework of the Enlightenment, was to take every facet of the human endeavor, every facet of the human experience, every facet, science, the natural world, biology, but also things like government. And so to apply logic to government. And John Locke was amongst those, but also, nope, wrong one. Nope, 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 nope. Yeah, that one. So, who were the Philosophes? Well, the Philosophes were a group of thinkers, most of whom lived in France, um, who were believers in the power of reason, the power of human beings with their mind to unlock the secrets of the universe and have that reason would provide the answer to everything. And B, as far as nature, they were believers in the goodness of human nature. Remember that our good friend Thomas Hobbes said that human beings are naturally evil, and if given the choice, human beings will naturally do wrong. And it's a very dismal view. Thomas Hobbes took a very dismal view of the human spirit. John Locke said, no, that's not true. The Philosophes also believed that everyone should find their own happiness. Uh, and that is a right. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hmm? That was Jefferson. John Locke said life, liberty, and property were natural rights. But anyway, um, that human beings, if left to their own device, part D, would make progress, would advance, would be smarter, would, make a better world if left to their own devices. And finally, that all human beings deserve liberty. And those are all glowing words, and it's really a generalization of who the Philosophes were. I will tell you right now, the Philosophes were not interested in the equality of women. They weren't particularly interested in ending slavery amongst non white races. And many of the Philosophes had their own prejudices against various people, like Jews, for example. Yeah. Now, but let's look at some major ones. Voltaire. Voltaire is probably one of the most well-known ones. Voltaire was not the guy's real name. His real name, Francois Marie Aurier. He wrote the book, which became a play, called Candide. Pardon me. Which criticized the upper classes by making fun of them. He was sent to prison twice because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He kept criticizing government, writing things, printing and publishing things that were critical of the French government. In fact, what is funny is that Voltaire finally got. He said, "Look, I can't shut up, and I can't stay out of jail." And so what he did, he moved from Paris down to the Swiss border, where France and Switzerland have a border. And he would write something and then hop across the border into Switzerland and just wait to see how things, you know, how things developed from reaction to his writing. And when things cooled down, he would come back across the border. I will say also about Voltaire. Voltaire had a permanent place in the court of Frederick the Great. He was well thought of, not only by Frederick the Great, but also by Catherine the Great. Now, how did he feel about intolerance? He despised intolerance. He said, "I may not agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to be wrong." Hmm? Yeah. He really did not like organized religion, and he really did not like the Roman Catholic Church. He felt that the Roman Catholic Church encouraged inequality amongst peoples, which it did at that time. And he felt that, in fact, his quote about organized religion, and particularly the Roman Catholic Church, was crush the infamous thing. Which, like I said, was about the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the Baron de Montesquieu was a nobleman. I mean, once again, all of these philosophes we're talking about here, they they came from the elites of society. They weren't poor people. They weren't uneducated people. And the Baron de Montesquieu is an example. He was a French nobleman, a guy who actually in France had it pretty good, very good, in fact. He wrote the book on the spirit of the laws, and he is the one who will come up with the ideas of separation of power in government and checks and balances. Now, okay, so to say that he actually came up with that, he really didn't. Actually, the Greeks came up with the idea of separation of powers in government. And the Romans, checks and balances. But when the founding fathers of this country were setting up the government, the Constitution, they leaned heavily on the Baron de Montesquieu. Now, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another philosopher, I didn't like him. He was, what's funny is, I mean, he was a hypocrite, actually. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was all about morality and goodness and those things. However, Jean-Jacques Rousseau had an insatiable sexual appetite. You have to remember that many of the philosophes, if not most of them, abandoned what we today think of as Judeo-Christian morality. In other words, living according to the Ten Commandments, living according to the Bible, living according to Christian or Jewish law or Muslim law. And this guy, even though he's married, never got tired of impregnating women. And you say, okay, so, well, after he impregnated them, of course, the woman would have a child. And somebody said, well, aren't you going to support the child? Well, what he would do with the child, he would take the child down to the nearest foundling hospital. Now, if you don't know what a foundling hospital is that an orphanage? Well, I guess you could say that. But the survival rate for children dropped off at foundling hospitals during this day and time was 10%. And Rousseau knew that as he went on to make his next sexual conquest. And what amazes me is the women still loved him. All right. What was the general will? The general will was what he said about, the people should not revolt. See, a lot of these guys, they wanted reform in government, but they would not have approved of the American Revolution. They wanted reform, but they didn't want revolution, because with revolution, people get killed. They thought, they spoke in generic terms, they spoke in intellectual terms that, society can be reformed without violence. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau said that people will ask for change, but they will not revolt because they are restrained by the general will. You say, what is that? The general will is what is good for the people as a whole. And he wrote a book called The Social Contract, in which he talks about the general will and those kind of things. So, as it says there, not to be confused with the contract theory of government of your hero and mine, John Locke. Caesar Beccaria specialized in crimes and punishments. He criticized the current method of crimes and punishments because at the time, criminal justice, crimes and punishments were unequal. I mean, for example, depending on where you were, all people committed crimes even then, and it was recognized that people committed crimes. But if you committed crimes and you were a member of the nobility that, for example, deserved a death sentence, you were beheaded. If you were a member of the lower classes, committed the same crime, deserving a death sentence, you would be tortured, put on the rack, drawn and quartered, and have it done in public. What was going on then to inspire his work? Yes. It really hasn't been. And in fact, in some countries, it still goes on that people who are accused of crimes are tortured to acquire confessions. Capital punishment, he was not opposed to that, but it was unequally distributed. And to be honest, it's still unequally distributed. That's another subject. And finally, the speed of trials. People who were accused of crimes often sat in prisons for months, if not years, awaiting their trial. So, were women of the Enlightenment of this era treated as equals? Do not ever think so. No. The fact of the matter was, the thinkers of the Enlightenment actually considered the question of equality of men and women. And they said, no, women are not equal to men, and I can prove it. And so basically, they set up experiments to prove that women were unequal. And you say, well, maybe they were right then. Well, no, because their experimentation was designed to prove that women were unequal. In other words, if you already have your conclusion in mind when you start your experiment, then your experiment is already flawed. And that's how they set up. For example, They compared men and women by comparing the corpses of men and women. For example, they compared the skulls of men and the skulls of women. Well, most women's skulls are smaller than most men's skulls. And so the enlightenment thinking, oh, smaller skull, smaller brain, less intelligent. They compared the body size, same thing, smaller skeleton, smaller body, less strength. And so, what about female education? Didn't see the necessity for it. Or equality in marriage? Forget about it. Okay, Mary Astell was a reformer. And see, here's the thing about women during the Enlightenment. In fact, women's history going forward for quite some time, and that is simply this. I mean, I'm all for the cause. I really am. Of equality for women, which is something we have yet to reach even today, even though we are making strides. But the simple fact of the matter is, history, HISTORY, history is actually his story, meaning that throughout the centuries, throughout time, man's, and see, look, you say man, human beings march on this earth, it has been dominated by males. Is that right? No, it's not right, but it is a matter of fact. And historians are supposed to report facts. History as it is, not as we would like it to be. So, yes, Mary Estelle wrote a book, A Serious Proposal to Ladies. She said that if absolute sovereignty be not necessary in a state, how comes it to be so in a family? And so, she's basically criticizing the Philosophes who, say, we don't need absolute sovereignty in the state. Well, she says we don't need absolute sovereignty in the home either. If all men are born free, how is it that women are born slaves? I mean, same thing. Mary Wollstonecraft is more important. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Woman, which is a document which responded to the French document, Declaration of the Rights of Man. She said that women should enter the dominant male professions, medicine, science, and politics. As of this time, the only thing women were basically allowed to do in the Enlightenment was to host salons. You say, well, what are salons? Salons were places people gathered. Yeah, predominantly in France. And so, yeah, they would have these watering holes where people would gather together and talk about ideas. And were women allowed to participate in them? Answer: no. They had to serve coffee. Emily did shop in L.A., did work in math and physics, and translated Isaac Newton's work from the Latin into French. Okay. We will begin with this on Monday, the effects of the Enlightenment. All right. And so I'm going to stop us there because I've already went over time. So, yes. And I will talk to you on Monday.